Everybody's still talking about the Switch 2, and that is not going to change anytime soon. It has almost been out for 3 months now, and it has done just excellent. I mean, it broke records like right off the bat. Tons of people have their hands on them, so you would think that pretty much all developers, anybody who wants to be anybody in the video game development scene, they want to get their game on the Switch 2, especially the smaller indie devs. But you see, this is actually quite a bit of a problem. I have talked about this in the past. This was mentioned long before today, but yeah, the Switch 2 dev kits, you know, the kits that go out to these developers that kind of show how to like port their games onto that specific console. These Switch 2 dev kits are actually in such a shortage. Now, I really need to emphasize such. Yes, such a shortage, so much so that it has just come out today that Nintendo, allegedly, is actually telling some developers that they should just put their attention on the Switch 1 console. They should just release their console on the Switch 1, don't worry about the Switch 2, and just hope that there is backward compatibility with their game. Yeah, no, this is coming from a podcast that was released yesterday by Digital Foundry. Now, that I have linked in the description. It took me a little bit of digging because it's like a 1.5 hour video on YouTube, but I did finally, after some digging, find the actual timestamp that they start talking about this, so I also put that in there. Visually, I'm just going to be looking at this Video Games Chronicle article that I saw that originally brought my attention to this. Developers are still struggling to get hold of Nintendo Switch 2 development kits after the console's launch, according to new reports. So it says in the latest edition of Digital Foundry's DF Direct Weekly podcast, the hosts reported that they had been told by numerous developers that they were still unable to get hold of a development kit to make Switch 2 games, and it does sound like this word of mouth mainly came from developers at Gamescom, which actually just ended like 2 days ago. So yes, this is extremely recent. Developers are basically saying that yeah, they can't get their hands on these dev kits, and Nintendo themselves are allegedly telling them to, or rather pointing them in the direction of the Switch 1 rather than the Switch 2. You would think the Switch 2 would very much be the preferred choice of where Nintendo would want to point these developers, but this is such a unique situation where that's just not happening. It says, according to Linneman, some developers were instead being told to make games for the original Switch for now, instead of specifically working on Switch 2 only titles. He said there's been a lot of talk lately that Nintendo seems to be almost discouraging Switch 2 development to some degree. He says, I've spoken with plenty of devs where they were told that their game, they should just ship it on the Switch 1 and rely on backwards compatibility. As I said, this wasn't just months ago, and the problem has been solved since then. I mean, we're talking as recent as this weekend at Gamescom, devs are saying this. So he said there are a lot of developers that are unable to get Switch 2 dev kits. We talked to a lot of devs at Gamescom this year, and so many of them said the same things. They want to ship on Switch 2, they would love to ship on Switch 2, but they can't get the hardware. It's really difficult right now. I don't know when all of this is going to end. I don't know when the Switch 1 is finally going to get left behind with development. You know, that's always a topic of discussion, to be fair. I mean, they're still making games today for the PS4 and Xbox One. That came out in 2013. So there's conversation on like when are devs finally going to stop supporting those consoles. But with the Switch 1, it now sounds like this is a much more unique situation. These devs actually kind of are forced to go with the previous generation of Nintendo consoles. So the Switch 1, I don't know if you've thrown it away. I don't know if you've completely sold it on eBay yet, but if you haven't, get ready to brush the dust off of it, because it sounds like we could be getting some new games very soon that are only coming out for, surprisingly, just the Switch 1.